morning, everybody. I think, as you saw from the timetable today, I think there's going to be enough detail. When I spoke to Paul about presenting this morning, I really wanted to talk more generically about probably the last 20 years of where the sport's at, where I've been, and it comes back down, I guess, to this about creating winning moments. And hopefully it's a bit flowery and stuff, but you should get it by the end of it, end of the presentation. And I think, you know, we're quite a pivotal point. I mean, like I said before, 20 years I've seen really, sports science isn't new anymore. In fact, some of it's quite outdated. Where we're moving to next is probably up to people in this room to define where we go next as an industry. I've got some concerns, and we'll talk about some of them with some of the key stakeholders really that we have to deal with: ex-players, players, managers, coaches, and so on and so forth. So I think it's time really the industry started to look at itself, and we really started to define or reboot where we're at and where we're going. More so than anything else, I think we have to make if we think about a continuum, if we think about, you know, sport for fun here, and then we talk about at this end of the continuum, probably what's happened British cycling over the last 2 to 3 years, real high performance sport. You know, so much so that everything, you know, push individuals, push staff members to the limits and the boundaries of human performance, win at all costs, maybe. And think about where you sit or where we sit or where we want to define ourselves on that continuum. And probably most of us are operating towards that high performance sector. And what is that? What do you want it to look like? How far are you prepared to push individuals? And I think when we're talking about this, and I keep coming back down to it now, my role now is youth development exclusively. It's just about young players, player development right through the system. Albeit the stakes are higher. You know, the financial, as I'm sure some of you are aware, the financial packages that 12, 13 and 14s are offered nowadays are absolutely ridiculous compared to, you know, professionals of 15, 20 years ago. The thing that we've got to be guarded about, and we'll talk about red flags and limitations that you put on athletes, is that what is our key responsibility? Well, one, it's to keep athletes training. One, it's to push them towards their genetic potential and ceilings. But more than anything else, those who are involved in high performance sport is to create new individuals capable of taking the game on, moving the game on. And we know from the work of Prozone and the work that's gone on in the last, you know, 5, 10 years that the game is continuously evolving. More dynamic players, more international recruitment, higher sort of speed thresholds at the higher ends of the game, and so on and so forth. So it's not just about repeating what others have done, it's about redefining where we're going within industry and redefining what we want it to look like. And then beyond that, really, we talk about science support. And we've probably gone through a cultural life cycle at Manchester United. I'm not involved at the first team anymore, so I can't really speak for what's going on at the first team level anymore. But what I can speak for is that when I entered Manchester United in 2007, they just won the Premier League. I'm moving into an organisation that's highly performing. What do you do? How do you do it differently? How do you sell it to the players? And it was about redefining where we wanted to go, rebuilding the facility, very much a sports science driven model. You know, we were attached to the late Professor Tom Riley, we were attached to Liverpool John Moores University because we wanted a quality of assurance, and it was very much driven by sports science. A lot of the key decisions were driven by sports science, but it was sports science that was intuitive. It wasn't, you know, the white cloak type stuff. It was really about, you know, delivering to the key stakeholders that were the players and making it human. So what does high performance mean? I think that's something that you have to define yourselves. Can you identify high performance support staff? I do feel now that we've gone from sports science models that were really thin to now, I think, potentially some clubs and some staffs are over-resourced. We've got too many staff now. And I was probably responsible for that at Manchester United. Went from recruiting generic staff that could do a multitude of things, developing young staff that can do the whole spectrum of activities, to then bringing in a recovery specialist, to bringing in a training load analyst and a training load specialist. Well, now we're overstaffed and over-resourced and under-delivered. But that's another argument altogether. So if you're not high performance, yeah, do you want to be? Where do you want to push that? and where do you want to find where you're at with your players. So when we talk about high performance, well, obviously it's about players, optimal recruitment, you bring them through the door. The big space that we're going to get into is about learning environments, learning spaces. How do you create a space for your athletes to thrive? And what does that look like? How you communicate with them, and how you produce that Manchester United experience or learning environment that is individualised to your programme. Optimal coaching and feedback, and obviously delivery from your perspective. That comes into how you then disseminate that information back within that learning process, and then the players of world-class performance. It's very, that's that kind of pyramid up towards high-performance sport. And then we come back really to winning moments, and what's a winning moment. And many years ago, a good friend of mine, Mike Ford, who worked at Chelsea, he spoke about, for each season there'll be 5 thunderbolt decisions that you've got to make. Now, I don't disagree with that, but I mean, what I would like to think that it's more about the accumulation of loads and loads of winning moments that, that come through the day and through the year. Every opportunity you have with an athlete is a winning moment. Every opportunity you get to communicate with a key stakeholder, i.e. a coach, a parent, or whoever, is the potential winning moment or a losing moment. Because once that service has been missold, it's very, very difficult to get it back. So what is a winning moment? It's a particular period of importance, influence, and a series of events or developments, and that's what it is. It's about interaction, daily interaction. How you create small wins along the way to build a culture that buys into what you want to build. Winning a moment's a matter of the right person, right message, right time, every time. Very, very important. I think this is one of the failings of sports science, is that, whenever you build this culture of sports science and support, is there's a consistent message amongst the staff. Because if you've got a coach that disrespects what you're trying to do, and that gets disseminated back to the players, then again, it's very, very difficult to get a buy-in. So it's consistent messaging right the way across. And for me, when we talk about the value of a high-performance team, everybody says the right message, at the right time, to the right people. And then you're joined up. And then, of course, we're in this space, and this is not a sales pitch for Catapult, but we are in the life and age of data, more so than we were 20 years ago. It's good to see Mark Gladwin back there. And, when I started in a porter cabin at Coventry 20 years ago, all we really had access to was a set of heart rate monitors, and that was it. And think about the rich data that, particularly the young sports scientists that are coming into the industry, they're inundated with, and they're drowning in a sea of data. So it's become more complex, we know that, and we'll talk about the complexity increases, the dawn of sports science, maybe the death or rebirth of sports science, however you want to talk it. I'm not being negative with sports science, it's just where we're at. But there's a growing reliance on spreadsheets, big data, and information-driven decision-making. And I think that's part of it. How do you make your decisions? And we'll come on to that about, that blend between art and science of decision-making. Because it's what you do. I mean, that's what you do. You're really always on that cusp. It's about mitigation of risk versus performance. How far do I push this player? And I probably felt as a fitness coach and as a sports scientist, I spent 15 years of my life really walking on eggshells about, probably erring on the side of caution. Because at that level, when you're dealing with players, if you get an injury and whatever that decision making you're going to make when you push these players, the buck stops with you. So how you make your decisions is very, very important, and it's that balance between art and science. And then, really speaking, players have changed considerably, even in the last sort of 5 years. And it's a really big issue that you're probably going to see if you're well networked and you're on social media through the summer, the number of young footballers that will go and get some kind of guru, sports science guru or fitness coach, and they'll be posting their sessions on Twitter. That never happened 5-10 years ago, but it's something that you're going to have to deal with now. How do you do that from a club perspective? How do you manage your players out of season? Because 20 years ago, it was very easy. Here's an out-of-season program, give it to the player. You could trust that they do 80% of it, you'd be happy with that, they come back. Now we've lost control of our young players. 19, 20, 21-year-old players will be posting their sessions on social media. How do you deal with that? Highly confident the kids that are coming in, without a shadow of a doubt. You know, we only have to look at, you know, our biggest young signing, Paul Pogba, and he represents Generation Y. He's the face of Adidas. He's what we're talking about, and we have to communicate with him, and we have to get on his wavelength. We can't bemoan the fact that he's always on his mobile phone or whatever, because that's the life he lives in. Techno-savvy, they're well-networked, independent thinkers. They want to think for themselves. And young staff want to think for themselves also. We have to manage that as older key stakeholders. They love variety and environment. They want fast results. They demand fast results, which is great for the technology that we're providing them with. And they need an individual approach. Hence, the number of individual fitness coaches that we're working with players in the next 5 to 10 years will grow exponentially. Zlatan Ibrahimovic brings his own guy, his own masseur, who works his S&C program as well. And that's going to come. It will come. It's in the game now. And there's not a lot we can do about it. If a star signing wants to bring his own team around him, it's what you've got to prepare yourself for. So really, when we're talking about creating winning moments, it's about connecting with your stakeholders, i.e. the players. How do you connect with them? How do you communicate with them? How consistent are you with that messaging all the time? And a bit about variety. You know, they'll come in, they'll want stimulation, constant stimulation. And we create environments for that. Okay, so life in the age of ideas, when we spoke about, and we're only talking about this movement in the last sort of 20, 30 years. During the late 80s, you know, everybody said the future is multimedia. You know, we've gone beyond that. At the turn of the 2000s, the future is the World Wide Web. 2010, it's about smart mobile devices. Now it's about pervasive technology. It's everywhere. Wearable tech. It's monitoring everything that our players do. You know, they're connected to a bigger worldwide audience. And it's about wearable technology. Really good guy, Stephen Wheeler, based down at Portsmouth. He talks about education in the modern world. It's definitely worth having a look at some of his presentations, more so for, you know, how do you create a learning space now to connect with these people? You know, what's it going to look like? What are you going to have in a changing room? How much can you trust players? What's their changing room going to look like in the next 5, 10 years? The problem I have is that the more and more we rely on smart mobile and delivering to them, the less and less we have as personal contact engaging with our athletes. Utilize that smart technology to connect with them, but don't rely on it as a way of communicating, because then you lose what you've got. And then really, you know, again, this is a generic thing, the last of the street football generation. Probably, Wayne is probably the last of that, what we would consider the street football generation that grew up playing football in the streets. A lot of his development time was spent running, you know, jumping, running, climbing, and so on and so forth. So that's the world we live in. One of the last great intuitive coaches, probably didn't rely on sports science necessarily, but understood that there was a value of it. Let us get on with it, which was great leadership from him. But all his decisions really were intuitive. You know, and some of the metrics that we've developed post Sir Alex Ferguson have been great. How many players it takes to challenge for 3 major trophies? Consistently 26 players. That wasn't delivered, that wasn't designed by sports science. He knew he had to have a squad of 26 players. He knew that he had to have 6 players capable of playing 50 games a year. Always had a spine of that, with his 2 central defenders, midfield players. You know, Cristiano Ronaldo, who played 50 games a year, consistently at Manchester United, then gone to Real Madrid, done the same thing. How he rotated his squad wasn't sports science driven. In his last season, when we won the league and he retired, he made on average, you know, 4.5 changes per game, albeit they weren't all Premier League games. So it was about squad rotation. But to rotate a squad and to manage a squad of 26 players, you have to keep them plates spinning. Very easy for us back then because the 11 took care of themselves. Our job was to ensure that they're ready to go into the team when he wanted them in the team. And he made that decision intuitively. And, you know, the great thing about how we managed the week, how we managed the squad, even how we managed pre-season. If I'm honest, he thought pre-season was a waste of time. It was a hindrance to him. It wasn't a case of coming in. At Blackburn, when I was at Blackburn, it was about getting into the players and getting them up to speed. For him, it wasn't, because he knew he wanted them fresh, come what may. The business end of the season. So you can't have it both ways. The season's got to give somewhere along the line. And he did that intuitively. We could speak forever about him, but there you go. And then what's the future? Is it about data-driven decisions and not player acquisition? Because I think a lot of what, analytics and Billy Bean and that Moneyball concept has been sort of lost in translation. But what it was about, at the end of the day, it was about, information-driven decisions. One key learning: never rely on an ex-player to give you a bit of support. 6 years kept him going, and then probably an interview as a sort of a cast-off comment. It's about sports science. Overprotection is robbing the current, future generations of robustness. I wouldn't mind, but robustness was a term that I used. So he's nicked that off me and used it against us. But I know what he's saying. So when we talk about sports science and where we're going with things and red flags and stuff, I think that's what Rio's talking there. Albeit, the whole concept of the second-day recovery was probably driven by the older players in our squad, 35, 36, 37-year-olds. How do we keep Ryan Giggs going and Paul Scholes going at 35, 36 and 37? Well, 2 days after a game was a real critical day for us. So it was a lighter day for them guys. But, what tends to happen in that environment is that the younger 19, 20, 21-year-olds, want to sort of jump onto that programme, and we want to increase robustness down there whilst increasing longevity up there. So I think that was lost in translation, but I understand where he's talking. But the sad thing about it is that at a flip of a hat, all the work that you build over 15, 20 years, trying to build a sports science department that can communicate with athletes, can be broken straight away. I read this week, Dave Parnaby, who probably been one of the most successful academy directors at Middlesbrough for a number of years. And again, he's talking about we're in an era of sports science, coaching, psychology. It's boxed, it's coached, it's scientific. Freedom expression, freedom play is gone. And I don't really understand, where sports science has gone to get such a, a negative reputation, but it has. And, we've got to realign that. I mean, I don't necessarily agree with that. I've got to be honest. I don't think that, sports science should be mutually exclusive to freedom of play. I think if you get it right, you can kill two birds with one stone. But it's a perception, and what is a perception of 70, 80% of academy directors of sports science? Maybe we need to change the name. Maybe we need to reframe that, reboot it. So coming back to critical moments and what I'm talking about, this is a little bit about individual philosophy. This is against Arsenal. This is Wayne picks the ball up here, probably about 8 years ago now. Box to box in probably, 7, 8 seconds with a high quality finish. And, when we had that team back then, and I think this is where sports science, and we'll talk about this a little bit about, okay, you go into an organisation, is that what was the Man United way? It was counter-attacking, it was quick play, it was absorb pressure and break quickly, and you have to recruit the right individuals, i.e. Jason Park, Nani, Wayne Rooney, Cristiano Ronaldo, Ryan Giggs in his pomp, that can go here to here in 6, 7 seconds with high quality finish. And now your sports science and your conditioning strategy is born around that. That's what you're looking for. High quality players, specialists in their area, power, speed, high quality, the ability to repeat that. And then your training really can replicate that, can't it? It's about high speed training. And that's really all we did. It wasn't a volume based method at all under Sir Alex. It was about high quality. Sometimes we'd only train for 45 minutes. But it was high quality, minimal breaks. Everything was born around how you want to play. If you speak to some of the players a day before a game, we'd only play 16 minutes, 9v9. We didn't want too big a numbers a day before a game because everybody wanted a touch. Some of the players said that was the hardest bit of their week because we had such a good crop of players. That wasn't sports science, by the way. Such a high level within the team. That 9v9 on a Friday was the highest quality. 16 minutes done. It's boxed off. So train quick, I still, you know, that's always been my philosophy about quick training. I have worked in environments where it's a volume-based method, and guess what? That works too. You can build incredibly resilient, robust players in a high-volume model. We had it at Man United with our under-21s, where the players would hit 60, 70 kilometres per week in pre-season and continue to do it. And they wouldn't break because they were used to it. But it was a different way of training to our first team. You know, we're doing a little bit of research within the club at the moment about, it's not so much what you do, how you do it, volume, high speed. It's about change, really, going from one method to the other. That's when you tend to get problems. Execution of skill under pressure, but ensure that's our job. That's our job. Can our athletes cope with them demands and do it again, and do it again, and repeat it? I think, again, we'll come back to what a high-performance player is, but Cristiano Ronaldo, when he was at Man United, he averaged a game every 3.9 days. That's incredible, to work at that level and continue with it. A little bit about performance intelligence, and you know, I spoke to the goalkeeper coach that was with us that night when we won the Champions League. We would not have won the European Cup had it not been from the homework that we put in. Fact. Fact. Went to penalties. It's a quote from Peter Vint that, but in contests that are decided by fractions of an inch and fractions of a second, everything we do matters. And that's the science of winning. And that's the science of creating winning moments. About building intelligence through what you do. Performance intelligence. Again, a little bit about my sort of individual philosophy about sports science, what it should be. If it's measurable, measure it. I don't care, just measure it. If it's controllable, control it. If it's both, record it, because you're not going to learn. You know, what are our key learnings? How can we look back unless we keep a log of what we do? Because most significant events have occurred on that curve before. As we'll talk about, don't get bogged down with trying to predict injuries and stuff. It's a waste of time. We've been there, we've done it, we've failed. We spent 2 years and a lot of money trying to work this injury prediction model that I'll talk about. And you know what? It's just too complex. And you end up making type 1 errors. You end up thinking that a player gets injured because of X. It's far too complicated. There are so many different parameters involved of when a player breaks down. Don't judge too quickly. Our function, again, and I think this is where we lost sight a little bit about and it probably hit, for me at home, probably about 4 years ago under Louis van Gaal. It wasn't his fault, albeit it was our staff. We rocked up to Seattle training ground, beautiful training ground in the States. I'd gone down to set up a warm-up, and when I arrived, I'd set up for 20 players. We had 19 players. We had a 19-year-old player that his wellness was down and he was pulled out of training. Really? Is that where we're at? As you can imagine, I wasn't too pleased with the sports scientists with me, but our function is to keep them training. You know, when you get a high-risk player that has, you know, a lot of injuries, invariably it's because they're up there, then they're down there. It's more, you know, maintaining a consistent approach. Try to keep them training. Even if it's a reduced load training, try to keep them training, because that's what athletes do. Yes, they need regeneration, they need recovery, it's about the right timing, but try to keep them training rather than prevent them from training. We've touched on that really about what these high-performance players are, but these are your top guns of Wayne, you know, and I think when you look at the career that he's had and that span from almost a 17, 18-year-old to when I first went in at 2007-08, all these characteristics, define them. They're good metrics to have. Playing time is a good metric to have. I've just looked at some of our under-23 data this year. You know, and some of them are only playing 22, 23 games. It's nowhere near enough. We're not building resilience through that games program. It's not enough. Because Marcus Rashford now, you know, at the same age as some of our under-23 players, he could be hitting 40, 45 games this year. This guy in his pomp was hitting 50 games. At 19, 20 years of age, he was playing 40, 45 games. And you can't take that away from a young Wayne Rooney. Incredible strength and robustness, resilience at a young age. Window of opportunity, that age, high performance work rates, 50 games a year with internationals, playing a game at this period of the season, you know, really when you're going to every 3-4 days, benchmark targets, that X factor. They're talented, they're coachable, they're ambitious, and they've got personality. So really, just a couple of sort of lessons from and we'll talk about all of these, about creating winning moments. I think first and foremost, it's about having a vision and I think it's identifying, so okay, you're in whatever environment you work in, where is it going? Where are going to be the next steps? I think, like I said before, the big thing around learning, how we create learning environments, that's going to be really, really big. I think the other thing is going to be about sort of the personality, the intelligence part that we're really, really looking into. And the third part of really where the game's going is that how do we create these sort of like robust, resilient athletes, mentally and physically, and what are we looking for? And that's down to us to define that. So when we're talking about a vision, what are we going to turn to next? Where's it going to? And I think that's what you've always got to be looking at, is where the industry is going and where are the big steps to be made, or where the quick wins. And what's going to be the unique selling point for your organisation, for your programme, whatever it is. I'm not just talking at the top level, whatever level you work at, what do you want to be defined as? The other thing is about passion and dedication. First and foremost, it's about work ethic and preparation. Facing a challenge, a commitment. Excellence is a choice. Where you want your program to be, and a willingness to keep learning and dealing with that, because you are going to have some setbacks. So in that sort of journey towards creating winning moments, you will have setbacks. You will have tensions. You will have conflicts. You will have fallouts. But if you want to create a movement, it's about that passion and dedication to keep going. We've all been there. All had some bad times. Big thing about how do you create a high-performance culture? And it is the game, really. And again, that was where we were at 20 years ago. And I think that's working out of a porter cabin at Coventry City. And I think that's where I'm back now. I'm working in a porter cabin. That's a different story altogether. But we're here again. It's about building culture again. Building culture maybe at this level. It's about trying to win coaches over again. It's about trying to define where we want to go with it and where we're at. But you can't do anything if the culture's not right. And I think more so than one of the real great quotes from Gary Neville. He's not made many, but this is a real good one. Man United are never, and this comes from a player within the system, and don't get me wrong, he was brilliant. He was a culture architect, he was busy, he would drive, and do you know what, sports science, delivering that, when he was a player, he was a pain in the backside, but I tell you what, he got things done for you as a member of staff. It was great. It was one of them double-edged swords. You would fall out of him every other day, but that was him. He drove it, so he knew that. He knew that what we were trying to do at Manchester United, even in the latter stage of his career, he knew it was the right thing for the players. No end in sight. It's a relentless charge year after year. It wasn't just about winning the league and settling for that. It was going again. And I think that was always part of it, is that where you're looking for, where you're looking to take your programme on. Really, really important thing this. You think about, and I think of this slide, I've used it on a number of different areas. You can think about a life cycle of a player in his formative years, right the way up to high performance. And then when the player's in decline, 30, 32 years of age, what I'm trying to sort of get across here is that if you've got something that's complex like sports science, that's complex like data and so on and so forth, or even psychology, any of these services that we deliver, you can't just expect to go into an organisation that's mature and expect it to work. You've got to grow, and it's got to grow organically with the staff. So many of us foul, or we've been in situations where we foul and we take something really, really complex and expect it, to just transport it into a culture. And I experienced that at West Ham, and it took 3 years at West Ham really to get inroads, and it was a really, really difficult task. They'd just been relegated. I went in with Alan Pardew, and he was really good. The great thing about Alan is that he wanted to use sports science to change the culture. And he'd seen that what he'd grown and developed at Reading worked for him at Reading, and they had a buy-in. But you couldn't just transport what he did at Reading into West Ham, and it took us time. And we got to a period where results weren't great, and we were on the edge, and we could have gone at one moment. But what I learned from that is that you have to grow it, introduce it, grow it with the players and with the organisation into that maturing stage. And when it declines, because it will, when we talk about cultural life cycle of probably the performance lab at Man United, we probably had a life cycle of about 8 years. 8 years from start really to the end, and then really what we have to do, we just have to regrow it, reboot it, and it flicks off again. And a bit like the Milan Lab, for those of you who are not aware of the Milan Lab, we tried to copy that really in 2007, 2008. We went over there, it was a lot of smoke and mirrors, but the Milan Lab at the time, they were great at PR, they were great at manufacturing what this sort of like this Milan Lab was. There's some really good things about it, but it had a life cycle. After 7, 8 years, the players just, didn't revolt against it, but they just didn't want to be tested every single day. So it needs to be regrown and rebirthed and go through that cultural life cycle again. But the culture is the game, it's everything. So the Man United experience that we just spoke about, that was our vision. High tech, and again, whether it's right or wrong, whether people agree or disagree, it was about preparing the players and driving performance. The whole idea around it and sort of rebuilding the environment and looking at the player flow into the building, out of the building, and all the support we wrap around them was about monitoring effective training load, everything they do, but making it player friendly, really, really player friendly. They didn't feel like guinea pigs coming in every day, and we ensured that we did that. So that was about the investment in facilities. Some things fell along the way. Tools like Amiga Wave, when I first went in, we had that, and we're making decisions on that, which was incredulous, really. That went out the window pretty quickly. So it's about an investment in facilities. And we're not talking, I think, more than anything else, is getting the culture right, getting the workflow right, and getting the engagement with the athletes right, more so than spending millions and millions of pounds. What was the return over a 7-year period? Well, yeah, we had a 15% increase, and the key metric along the way was about player availability. That's how really we should be judged. Can we keep them training? Over a 7-year period, increase of 10-15% player availability, which is great. Everybody gets the buy-in. But again, that only lasts for so long. You have to reboot yourself and redefine yourself. We've said that about sort of performance intelligence. Don't want to sort of touch on that. But the idea really was that when a player came in, and this is just a little graphic about monitoring everything we do and understanding everything that we looked at, performance levels. And I think that's the other thing about all the performance directors that we have in professional sport. What is performance? And the next, the big piece for me really is about defining what performance is. And how do you define or measure the impact of your performance service? How do you know as a sports scientist, as a fitness coach, as a coach, that you're improving performance? Then you can't have a performance director if you're not looking at performance. Then we touched on risk management, because it's what you do on a daily basis. Every single day when you're working with players, when you're making decisions, it's about mitigating that risk management. Are you risk averse? Are we now moving into an area where, will we have lawsuits in the next 5 to 10 years with all the growth of Catapult and the information that's coming in? We have individual learning plans for players within the academy. We're duty bound to provide evidence now, because there will be lawsuits. And it's about risk management. You only have to look at what's going on in behind the scenes with the concussion models and the head injuries of ex-players. When we look at osteoarthritic knees in 5, 10 years' time, if you have players in your system and you're not monitoring what you're doing and acting on that information, are you liable? And again, that's a whole area of sports governance that's going to be coming into the game. It's boring, but you've got to be aware of it. But we do that on a daily basis. So we did some injury research. Like I said, we spent a lot of money with John Moores, and at the end of it, we had some nice insights, but it didn't really drive the process. What we found, really, factors associated with injury would be independent factors of about 5, the position they play, how old they were, and at the time we had an ageing group. Within 3 years of winning the Champions League in 2008, we had a 25% increase of players over the age of 30. And what you saw at the back end of Alex Ferguson's reign is that we extended careers. It was great. The lab was there to extend careers, to keep players playing. But there came a point probably in 2013, and unfortunately for David Moyes, when he took the team on, he had a squad that would have been rebooted. I'm not saying that Sir Alex wouldn't have rebooted that squad, because he would. He was the master at defining and growing a squad. but we had a lot of players over the age of 30, 35. And it got to a point really where these young dynamic teams of Liverpool, Man City and Chelsea, you're looking across on the bench and you think, woof, they've got youth on their side. So age was a factor. The other thing we found was that our younger players, 19, 20, we had a disproportionate number of injuries there as well. They weren't resilient coming into the programme, which is why we're looking at what they're doing in their formative years now to build that resilience. Body mass, obviously the lighter the players, more efficient movement. Then to do about training load. So you've got really some constitutional factors that don't really change that much, and then you've got the things that you can sort of like these kind of transient variables, high intensity running that really, and this was high level research with Greg Atkinson and the guys at John Moores University. What we found really is that two players there, one on the left, one on the right. I won't tell you that player on the left is, but if you look back on our records, it's really easy to identify. And that was week number, over 25 weeks. Yellow is when they broke down with an injury. You always have high-risk players, low-risk players. Identify them. Yep. And invariably, some of these low-risk players, pretty much really robust, really resilient, shouldn't really break down. What we did find, however, is that when he did break, it was to do with a change, and that would have been training load, something that's that's not a static variable. So we can keep a high risk player going, but as soon as there's a change in load or a change in one of them variables, that's invariably when a player will break the yellow. And you saw that again there. As soon as there's an up, so it's not necessarily what you do, it's a level of change, and that's probably one of the key learnings from that. Quality feedback, we spoke about that, creating winning moments. It's about high quality feedback to coaches. The number of times that it drives me crackers when a coach goes to one of our younger sports side. What was the session like today? Yeah, it was good. What does that mean? It was good. What does that mean? What kind of feedback is that? So it's about framing what the coach wants and feeding it back into a language that I don't just want you, it was a good session. We'll define good. And then really sort of like the last sort of few slides are going to be about operating in this crazy world that we spoke about, the world of social media, the world of individual fitness coaches. That's the world that you're going to be operating. It's very, very much a VUCA, volatile, it's uncertain, it's complex, ambiguous world that you live in. For those of you who are not aware of that term, it was phrased by the US military in Iraq and Afghanistan. And basically it's about, well, okay, you live in this crazy world that you want a plan in place, but don't always be driven by that plan. You've got to be flexible and you've got to be agile in your decision making. A bit like Mike Tyson said, I had a plan until I got hit. And very much, think about the crazy world of Iraq and Afghanistan and so on and so forth. And you've got to operate in that. And how you operate in that world, it's about you've got to act quickly to unfolding situations. The world that we live in, football, or the world of professional sport, high-performance sport, is so dynamic and fast-changing on a day-to-day basis. Players get injured, players get bombed from the squad, players come back into the squad, somebody who's not played for 6 months suddenly is in the frame. Think about everything that goes on. It's absolutely crazy. It's quick. And how you frame that day. From when you go in to see the players, things are at 100 mile an hour. And you've got to act appropriately in that. Anticipate the risks, like I said before, but don't invest too much time in injury prediction and trying to predict performance. Don't do it. It's a waste of time. Make your decisions as much on intuition as analysis. That's where you marry the two together, the art and science. And resist the temptation to judge before you analyse. How many times, and I've had loads of arguments with physiotherapists in my time. It's funny that, but there you go. Player gets injured, physio straight away, it's because of X, Y, and Z. Hamstring injury, it's because he's got a new car. Really? Is that the reason why he's got a hamstring injury? I think at times we're really, really keen to get a decision and box it off because it fits our way of thinking. But don't do that. Get your facts and your figures together before you make them decisions. And that's part of creating them winning moments along the way. Build trust, and that's about your character and how competent you are as an individual. Integrity, very, very big, about authentic leadership. Consistent message, be honest. You know, if that's what you want a player to do, you tell him that's what you want. You don't say it's because the manager wants it. It's about having integrity, because players will see through that. Stakeholders will see through that. It's about intent, being consistent, capabilities, demonstrating that over time you've won them winning moments time and time again, and your results. But relationship and trust building is about consistent behaviour, being consistent as a practitioner. Very, very important. And that's about your abilities, your capacity to set and achieve your goals with the athlete. Spoken about this years ago, about how you make decisions. That guy Nicholas Taleb, he wrote the book The Black Swan. For those who haven't read it, I won't bother, just get a breakdown because it's like chewing sawdust. But there's a couple of really good things in there about, you know, we talk about how we make decisions. We have a blink decision, you know, a really rapid decision that you make, and something that's a bit more sort of rational. But more often than not, you know, what we try to do, this retrospective distortion. An event happens, a player gets injured, and you want to box it off, and you suffer from that confirmational bias, because everything, you see the world through that same mistake. Very, very important that you don't do that. So, then dual modes of thinking. Intuitive, system one, make sure you use two, both systems. One's that sort of that effortless, it happens quick, and you build that with competence and years in the industry. The other bit is that, you know, what you have as a sports scientist, as a fitness coach, you have information. You have a wonderful, rich data set of which to tap into to help you make fewer mistakes. But that often, you know, resist the temptation to always make them snap decisions. And then the last thing really is that, this is a French term, I'm not even sure it's the right term that I'm looking for, is that our young fitness coaches and sports scientists really have operated in a world where everything's there for them. You know, as a young member of staff, you go into Man United and you can imagine it's great resources, as it would be at Tottenham, Chelsea and so on and so forth. But, you know, one of the things that we had to do 20 years ago was make the best of what we had. Be creative with how you create that learning environment. And I'm just going to flick one too, is that, you know, what I tried to do 2 years ago with our young ones was go back to the old gymnasium of 20 years ago, 30 years ago. But again, when we look at some of the guys that I've developed at Man United, you know, they've got everything on tap, they've got high technology, and that's all they're used to dealing with. When that goes, or when that breaks down, they haven't got a plan B. So make sure you make the best of the resources you have in hand. But it's about observation and listening. So when we talk about winning moments, observe the athletes, listen to the athletes. You don't necessarily need to take, you know, their wellness on an iPad, but engage with athletes, trust in your ideas, and any structure can be self-directed. And one of the guys I'm working with now, a guy called Les Parry, who's had a really colourful career at Tranmere Rovers. He started off as, I think, as a masseur. He then became a physiotherapist. He got his PhD in injury rehabilitation. He drove the minibus. He ran the pre-season. He became manager of the football club. Then he got sacked. And you know what? Les is probably one of the most creative guys we've got. You know, he's in his mid-50s. He probably looks about 85. But that comes with managing Tranmere, I guess. But he's brilliant at that. You know, give him a small environment in which to work, and he can thrive in any environment. And I think that's, you know, part of what we talk about winning moments, is that plan B. You know, and when you're developing young staff, they've got to be able to work outside the box. And then really, I guess that's to recap. I do think it's about winning moments. I'm sure you're going to be inundated with some great, rich data. I didn't want to sort of get bogged down in that. But when we talk about the Man United way, it really was about creating fast-flowing, attractive football, you know, high dynamic players, and arguably, you know, one of the reasons that Manchester United probably made the decision to move away from Louis van Gaal is because his philosophy wasn't in tune with that. But it was a good philosophy nonetheless, really, really good philosophy. So I think that's about it. Thanks, guys.